Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today we're doing the ultimate comparison, the comparison of comparisons. This is the Jazzmaster versus the Jaguar. These guitars are incredibly similar, and at a glance they look identical. So today we're going to look at all the differences between them, help you make a decision on which one you might prefer, and then you can just have all this trivia knowledge that you can share with your friends about the differences between Jazzmasters and Jaguars. I'm not going to cover the history so much of the two guitars. There's really great videos out there. 5 Watt World has 2 little documentaries on the history of these guitars. It's going to be purely from a playing experience, purely from a tonal experience. And at the end of the day, like, what is the difference when you're playing them on stage or recording, and why you might want to choose one over the other. Let's get started. Today, the 2 particular models I am comparing is this classic vibe 60s Jazzmaster with a vintage modified Jaguar. They're both relatively in the same price bracket, and they're both pretty close to vintage spec. So this is going to be pretty typical for Jazzmasters and Jaguars. They both have the standard pickups as well, so you'll be able to hear the tonal characteristics that should apply to most Jazzmasters and most Jaguars. Fender over the years has released ones with humbuckers and P90s and a whole bunch of different combinations, but this is your original recipe Jazzmaster and Jaguar. I'll point out the differences if we get to them between these ones and vintage examples or different American versions of these guitars. Let's start with the headstocks. The headstocks are particular to these models. The Jazzmaster has a Jazzmaster headstock and the Jaguar has a Jaguar headstock. Neither of them are the larger 70s Strat style headstock that CBS into manufacturing in the 70s. They're both really nice looking. I like the proportions of the Jazzmaster one more, but that's totally subjective. I'm not one to say that bigger headstocks have better tone. I've heard that before. That's if that works for you, man. Moving on down to the next, here is probably the biggest difference between the 2 guitars, and that's scale length. The Jaguar has a 24-inch scale length. The Jazzmaster has a 25.5-inch scale length. That's going to make the biggest difference in playability. With the Jazzmaster, you feel like your hands further out because the neck starts a little bit further down in the body than a typical Tele or a Strat. So the string tension feels pretty similar to the other Fender guitars, but it's a little bit more out. The Jaguar, on the other hand, feels proportionally more similar to a Strat or a Tele, but in terms of string tension, it's a completely different animal. Both guitars typically come with a rosewood fingerboard. The Jazzmaster here has some kind of substitute. The vintage modified Jaguar has original rosewood. And they both have a similar type C neck to a Strat. They're much more related to Strats than they are Teles. So if you feel comfortable on a Strat, you'll feel pretty comfortable on one of these guitars. Going back to the scale length though, the Jaguar overall feels like a more compact instrument. So if you're a shorter person like myself, you might prefer a Jaguar just purely based on comfort. For me, I have large hands, and the Jaguar does feel a little bit more constrained than the Jazzmaster does, so I do prefer the Jazzmaster for that. Going down to the bodies of these 2 guitars, they're similar, but they're not the same. So it's important to mention that the top horns of both guitars are actually different. The Jazzmaster has less of a cutaway, while the Jaguar has more of a cutaway. In day-to-day playing, that's not really, you almost never really notice it. Your thumb has like, I don't know, half an inch more space. It's not the biggest difference in the world, but it is a difference. Both guitars feature contours. The Jaguar has slightly different contours than the Jazzmaster. The Jazzmaster's contours are a little bit softer. They're both about equally as comfortable, I'd say. They're really great for sitting down and playing. They're super comfortable. And then standing, I feel like they're super comfortable as well. They're just overall a super ergonomic design. Let's move on to the pickups. These are where the bigger tonal characteristics, where the bigger differences in the tonal characteristics happen. The Jazzmaster has really wide coils, so it's going to pick up a lot of the string's surface area. I find that the Jazzmaster has a lot more like width to the tone. You get a lot more highs and a lot more lows. It's kind of like a cool hi-fi sound. It's not everybody's cup of tea though. It's much less of a traditional Fender sound than the Jaguar is, but it gives you a lot of width in your sound, especially if you're putting on effects and stuff like that. That's why these guitars are so popular with shoegaze. If you're like slamming fuzz on it, it's gonna sound like really gnarly because of all that high end and all that low end. The Jaguar, on the other hand, has a more traditional design minus the claw. It has these like metal claws surrounding the pickup, and what that does is it really focuses the magnetic field on the area of the string. So it's related to a Strat. Like, I'd say you could sometimes fool yourself into thinking you're hearing a Strat while it's still a little bit different, which is why we need to buy like 15 guitars, because they're all a little bit different, aren't they? Another difference in the two guitars are the pick guards and the switching. The Jazzmaster has a full body pick guard, which is a bit of a cleaner look as opposed to the chrome on the Jaguar, but the chrome on the Jaguar isn't just there for looks. It's also really practical. If you're working on different sections of the wiring, you can just pull out that particular section without having to take the whole pick guard off. So for somebody who likes to work on their guitars, that's a nice little creature comfort, as well as it's just looking pretty cool. The Jazzmaster features a typical three-way switch, volume and tone, plus the rhythm circuit. And the Jaguar is similar, minus it, instead of having a traditional three-way circuit, it has 2 on and off switches for the pickups, plus a high-pass filter, also known as the strangle switch. It's for me, playing live and kind of trickier situations. If I want to go like from the neck pickup to the bridge pickup on the Jaguar, sometimes you kind of like cut your signal out for half a second, even less than that, because at one point both pickups are off. And it's a little bit trickier to kind of wiggle your fingers in there, especially like if you're in the middle of playing, but that's something that comes with practice. I found the high pass filter to be more practical in kind of live settings and not quite recording settings. If you're like purely going guitar into amp or something kind of simple like that, it really helps you cut through the mix. And when you're like working live with PAs and stuff like that, if you want to poke out for a solo, that high pass filter is really great. Both guitars feature the offset vibrato, which is great. I love it. I love the shimmer it gives. I love the little ringing behind the bridge. That being said, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you're looking at these guitars, you probably don't want something that's everybody's cup of tea. Both guitars feature the typical Fender offset bridge. This particular Jazzmaster has a Mustang style bridge, which means it has less grooves than a traditional Jazzmaster or Jaguar bridge. The Jaguar, on the other hand, is more vintage correct. You will find on some Jaguars a bridge mute. It's this little metal lever that pushes a piece of foam against the strings that kind of mutes it. Kind of the same as a palm mute, but you don't have to use your palm, I guess. So at this point, we're gonna move on to a sound demo. I didn't want to put it like in the middle of the video because it's gonna be long. There's a lot of different switches and combinations. I'll have them labeled as best as I can. We'll compare side to side when that comparison is appropriate. There's some pickup combinations on the Jaguar that is not available on the Jazzmaster, so you'll just hear the Jaguar by itself for that. So now that you've heard the sound samples, hopefully you got a taste of a little bit the difference between a Jaguar and a Jazzmaster. I'll tell you what I heard in my ears. The Jazzmaster was overall a lot hotter in terms of its signal output, but it also was a lot brighter, so it was driving the amp a little bit more. The Jazzmaster was a lot more articulate, while the Jaguar was a lot more focused in terms of its sound and in terms of the difference between the high and the low end. The Jazzmaster, it's just its own sound. It's its own thing. This is a lot more comparable. It's a lot more of a traditional Fender kind of sound. And there's nothing wrong with that. That might be your cup of tea, actually. So now you've kind of heard them in a mix plus individual sound samples. Let me know in the comments which one you like more. I'm personally going to stick with my Jazzmaster as my tried and true. The Jaguar has been a cool thing to have in the studio overall. Let me know if you want a full review of this particular Jaguar. But besides that, thank you so much for watching. Catch you in the next one.